The silence in Catherine's penthouse was a specific and curated thing. It was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of immense, polished emptiness. It was the kind of silence that absorbed warmth, that reflected perfection, that cost a fortune to maintain. Alara Vance had learned to move through it without disturbing its expensive stillness, a ghost in a home that was never truly lived in. For 2 years, she had been the curator of its only real life, two small children named Maya and Leo. She was their warmth, their routine, their quiet constant in a world of architectural glass and emotional distance. Catherine called it a staff meeting, which was her term for a unilateral declaration delivered from a white leather throne of a chair. Alara stood before her, hands clasped loosely, her posture a study in practiced calm. She had long ago perfected the art of being present but invisible, a state Catherine's presence demanded. "Ilara," Catherine began, her voice as crisp and sterile as the room around them. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the glass surface of her desk. The sound was like a tiny, sharp crack in the ice. "Mr. Kim and I have re-evaluated the children's developmental needs. We feel they have reached an age where a more structured, academic-focused caregiver is required. A governess, if you will." Alara did not react. She had seen this coming in the subtle shifts, the way Catherine had begun referring to her as the help in phone calls instead of by name. It was the slow, deliberate erasure that preceded the final act. She thought of Leo's carefully constructed Lego castles that now covered his bedroom floor, and Maya's newfound love for chapter books, which they read together every night, tucked into a small armchair that was the only soft thing in the entire apartment. Academic focus. She had taught them that. "Therefore," Catherine continued, enjoying the theater of it, "your services will no longer be required. Your final payment has been processed. Our security will escort you out. You can have your belongings sent for." The words were delivered with the impersonal finality of a software update. There was no acknowledgement of the 2 years she had poured into this family, of the fevers she had soothed, the nightmares she had chased away, the tiny hands she had held while crossing busy streets. She was an obsolete program being uninstalled. Alara's only thought was of the children. They were at the park with one of Catherine's rotating assistants. They did not know. "May I say goodbye to them?" she asked, her voice steady. It was the only thing she would ask for. Catherine gave a small, dismissive wave of her hand. "That would be unnecessarily disruptive. They're resilient. They'll adapt. In a week, they won't even remember." That was the true cruelty. Not the firing, but the casual, confident annihilation of her bond with the children she loved, the assertion that she was forgettable, a temporary fixture. Alara felt a cold, hard knot form in her chest, but her face remained a mask of serene neutrality. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of her pain. "I see," she said. She did not say thank you. She did not say anything else. Two men in identical gray suits appeared as if summoned from the polished floors. They did not touch her, but their presence was a firm, unyielding boundary. They walked her to the private elevator, their steps silent on the marble. As the doors slid shut, sealing her out, she saw her own reflection for a moment in the polished steel, a woman in a simple blue dress, her face calm, her eyes holding a storm. The elevator descended 30 floors in absolute silence, a journey from a sterile sky castle back down to the real world. The rain started the moment she stepped onto the street, a sudden, furious downpour that matched the tempest inside her. She didn't have an umbrella. She walked, letting the cold water soak through her dress, plastering her hair to her skin. It was a physical sensation to focus on, a distraction from the image of Maya's face when she would ask where Ilara was tonight, of Leo's quiet confusion when he reached for a hand that was no longer there. "They won't even remember." The words echoed with the rhythm of her footsteps on the wet pavement. Her apartment was small, on the 4th floor of a walk-up, but it was hers. It was filled with books and the scent of the lavender plant on her windowsill. It was a place of safety, but tonight it felt like a cage of memories. Every corner held a phantom of the children. The crayon drawing of a wobbly-looking sun taped to her refrigerator, a gift from Maya, the scuffed copy of The Little Prince on her nightstand, which she'd been reading to Leo. She sank onto her sofa, the damp fabric clinging to her, and finally let the composure crack. She did not sob. It was a quiet, desolate grief, a hollowing out. She had been dismissed, erased, uninstalled. Hours passed. The rain hammered against her window pane, a relentless percussion. She stared at the drawing on her fridge, at the bright, impossible yellow of it. She thought about calling Jin, the children's father. She had his number for emergencies. But what was this? It was not a medical crisis or a fire. It was a domestic decision. He was a quiet, imposing man she saw only in passing, a figure of charcoal suits, and a low, calm voice who always seemed to be on his way to or from some other, more important world. He was polite, always, and his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of something she couldn't name. Assessment, perhaps. But he and Catherine were divorced. This was Catherine's domain. He would not interfere. It was almost 11 when the knock came. It was not a tentative rap, but a solid, measured sound. 3 distinct knocks. Her heart leaped into her throat. No one ever came to her door this late. She froze, listening. Another 3 knocks, just as patient and deliberate as the first. She rose slowly, her body stiff. She peered through the peephole, her breath catching. It was him, Jin Kim. He stood in the poorly lit hallway of her building, a place he had absolutely no reason to be. He was not wet. A long black coat shielded his perfect dark suit. He held no umbrella, but the rain seemed to have decided to avoid him. Behind him, almost blending into the shadows, stood another man, larger, holding an umbrella over them both. Jin was looking directly at the peephole, as if he knew she was there. His expression was unreadable, carved from stillness. Her hand trembled as she unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door. He did not look surprised by her disheveled, rain-soaked appearance. His dark eyes swept over her, taking in the damp dress and the exhaustion etched onto her face. He was not performing concern. It was a simple, silent gathering of data. "Maya called me," he said. His voice was low and steady, a strange anchor in the chaos of her evening. It was a voice that did not waste words. "She used the emergency number I gave her. She said Catherine told her you were gone forever." Ilara's throat closed. Maya. Of course, Maya would find a way. Fierce, brilliant Maya. "She said it was a code red," Jin continued, a ghost of something, not quite a smile, touching his lips. "I taught her that for actual emergencies." He paused. "I have come to believe this qualifies." Ilara didn't know what to say. He was a man who lived in penthouses and moved through the world in armored cars. He was standing in the dingy hallway of her building discussing a 7-year-old's definition of a code red. The sheer surreality of it was disarming. "She fired me," Ilara said, the words feeling small and inadequate. "I am aware," he replied. "Catherine has made a decision regarding her household. I am now making a decision regarding mine." He looked past her, into her small, clean apartment. "Pack a bag, Ms. Vance. You are coming with me." It was not a question. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same quiet finality as the closing of a vault door. The power in the hallway had shifted so completely it was a tangible force. Catherine's performed, brittle authority had shattered against this deep, quiet, structural power. This was the man who owned the foundations. Ilara stared at him, at the quiet sovereign who had come to her 4th-floor walk-up in the middle of a storm. For the first time all night, she felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was a strange, disorienting hope. She stepped back and let him in. The journey in Jin's car was like entering a different dimension. The interior was silent, smelling faintly of leather and clean, cold air. The rain streaked down the tinted windows, but inside, the world was still and calm. Ilara sat in the back, a hastily packed duffel bag at her feet. Jin sat beside her, not close, but his presence filled the space. He had not spoken since they left her building, simply watching the slick, glittering streets of the city slide by. Alara broke the silence. Her voice was a little rough. "Where are we going?" "To my home," he said, turning his head slightly to look at her. In the dim light of the passing street lamps, his face was a series of sharp, elegant lines. "Not the apartment Catherine uses, my actual home." He paused, his gaze steady. "The children are there. I had my people retrieve them an hour ago." Relief washed over her so intensely it made her dizzy. They were safe. They were with him. "Is that allowed?" she asked, thinking of custody agreements and legal complexities. A flicker of dry amusement in his eyes. "Catherine's residency and parental access are privileges outlined in our separation agreement, privileges contingent on her providing a stable and nurturing environment. Firing their primary caregiver without consultation or transition and causing them significant emotional distress is a material breach of that clause." He said it all with the calm precision of a lawyer reading a verdict that had already been decided. He had not just reacted to Maya's call. He had been waiting for this. He was working from a playbook Catherine did not even know existed. The car turned off the main thoroughfare and onto a quiet, tree-lined street of stately brownstones. It pulled up to one with a black iron gate and old, climbing ivy. The gate swung open silently, and the car eased into a private courtyard. The man who had been holding the umbrella opened Alara's door. She stepped out into a different world. This was not the cold, modern aesthetic of Catherine's penthouse. This was old money, solid and unpretentious. The brownstone was beautiful, with warm light glowing in the windows. It looked like a home. The front door opened before they reached it. An older woman stood in the doorway, her hair a neat silver bun, her face lined with a gentle wisdom. She wore a simple silk blouse and dark trousers. She smiled at Alara, a genuine, welcoming smile that reached her kind eyes. "You must be Alara," the woman said, her English accented but warm. Come in out of the wet. The children are waiting." Jin placed a light hand on Alara's back, a gesture of guidance. "Alara Vance, this is my mother, Minjun." Alara felt a blush rise to her cheeks. She had been so wrong. This man's world wasn't just boardrooms and armored cars. It was this. It was home and family. As she stepped inside, two small figures hurtled down the grand wooden staircase. "Ilara!" Maya's voice was a cry of pure, undiluted relief. She threw herself into Alara's arms, burying her face in her stomach. Leo was right behind her, more reserved, but he wrapped his arms around Alara's leg and held on tight, his face pressed against her hip. Alara sank to her knees, ignoring her damp clothes, and hugged them both fiercely. She breathed in the familiar scent of them, a mixture of soap and childhood. She felt Maya's small body trembling. "I thought you left," Maya whispered into her shirt. "I would never leave you without saying goodbye," Alara whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. She looked up and met Jin's eyes over the children's heads. He was watching them, his expression still, but the cold assessment was gone. In its place was something softer, something that looked like approval. Or perhaps relief. His mother, Halmoni, as the children called her, came forward with a soft blanket. "The children speak of you as they speak of the sun," she said quietly to Alara. "Something that must rise each day for the world to be right." She draped the blanket over Alara's shoulders. "Welcome to our home." Later, after the children were tucked into beds in rooms that were clearly theirs, filled with their toys and books, Jin led Alara to a library. It was a magnificent room, lined floor to ceiling with books, with a fireplace crackling softly. He poured 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter. He handed one to her. "This is your home now, if you want it," he said, his voice as quiet as the room. He was not looking at her, but into the fire. "A contract has been drawn up. It's on the desk. It's not an employment contract. It's a guardianship agreement. It gives you legal standing in matters concerning the children's welfare and education. Your salary is doubled. A trust has been established in your name. Your security, both financial and physical, is guaranteed." Alara stared at him, speechless. This was beyond generosity. This was an endowment. It was a rewriting of her entire existence. Why? She finally managed to ask. He turned to face her then, and his gaze was direct, intense. Because competence is the rarest commodity in the world, Ms. Vance, and loyalty is priceless. You have given my children both. Catherine sees you as staff, a disposable asset. He took a slow sip from his glass. She made a tactical error. I see you as the chief operating officer of my family, an essential executive. I do not lose essential executives. The corporate metaphor was so unexpected, so perfectly aligned with his worldview, that Alara almost smiled. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate. Catherine had seen a nanny. Jin Kim saw a pillar holding up his world. "My name is Alara," she said softly. "I know," he replied, and the way he said it made her feel, for the first time in a very long time, completely and irrevocably seen. The following weeks were a period of profound recalibration. Alara moved into a suite of rooms on the same floor as the children, a beautiful space with a small sitting room and a view of the garden. It was larger than her entire old apartment, but it wasn't the space or the luxury that disoriented her. It was the quiet, unconditional safety. For years, she had lived with a low-grade hum of anxiety, the precariousness of her position tied to the whims of a volatile employer. Here, that hum was gone. In its place was a silence that didn't echo but settled, the kind that lets you breathe. She threw herself into creating a new rhythm for the children. They had been living between two sterile environments, Catherine's penthouse and their father's equally quiet, if warmer, home. Alara began to fill the brownstone with the gentle, happy chaos of a real family. They baked cookies in the enormous kitchen, filling the air with the scent of cinnamon and sugar. They built sprawling forts out of blankets and chairs in the formal living room. Jin's mother, Min Jun, would often join them, showing Maya how to fold dumplings with expert fingers or telling Leo old Korean folk tales. Ilara was careful to assert her independence within this new structure. She was not a guest, she was a professional. She drew up new schedules for the children, incorporating art and music lessons. She interviewed tutors. She managed the household staff with a quiet efficiency that earned their immediate respect. She was, as Jin had identified, the COO of the family, and she was exceptionally good at her job. Jin was a constant, observing presence. He was not a man of effusive praise, but he showed his approval in other ways. He started leaving his downtown office earlier. He would appear in the late afternoon, his tie loosened, and simply sit in the kitchen while the children did their homework, watching Alara move between them, helping, encouraging. Sometimes their eyes would meet over the top of a textbook, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Their conversations happened late at night, after the children were asleep and the house had grown quiet. They would find themselves in the library, a silent agreement drawing them to the warmth of the fire. They never spoke of Catherine. They spoke of the children, of Leo's surprising aptitude for geometry, of Maya's fierce, blossoming intellect. One night, she found him staring at a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a younger Jin with a woman who was not Catherine. The woman was beautiful, with a warm, open smile. "My first wife," he said without turning. "Leo and Maya's mother. She died when Leo was a baby." Alara said nothing, simply stood beside him, giving him the space for the memory. "I married Catherine a year later," he continued, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It was a mistake, a strategic alliance that I foolishly believed could become a family. I thought the children needed a mother. I was wrong. They needed security. They needed consistency. They needed—" He trailed off, turning to look at her. "They needed you." The admission hung in the air between them, simple and profound. It was not a declaration of love, but something far more fundamental. It was a recognition of her place, her value, her irreplaceability. It was the antithesis of Catherine's casual, cruel dismissal. They won't even remember. But they did, and so did their father. Meanwhile, Jin was moving behind the scenes. His actions were precise, discreet, and devastatingly effective. Alara only caught glimpses of it. a quiet phone call he would take in his study, his voice dropping to a low, melodic Korean. A visit from his subordinate, the ever-present Mr. Choi, who would arrive with a thin leather briefcase and leave an hour later, bowing deeply. One evening, Mr. Choi left a file on the hall table by mistake. Ilara saw it before he returned for it. The label read, C. Devereaux, Asset Liquidation Schedule. Devereaux was Catherine's maiden name. Jin wasn't just protecting his family from her, he was systematically dismantling her. He was not simply taking away her access to the children. He was removing the financial stilts that held up her entire life, piece by careful piece. The relationship between Ilara and Jin developed in these quiet, shared moments. It was a slow burn, built not on passion but on a deep, mutual recognition of character. He saw her competence, her grace, her unwavering strength. She saw his hidden gentleness, his fierce loyalty, and the profound weight of the responsibility he carried. He provided a sanctuary, a fortress of safety. She, in turn, began to fill that fortress with light and warmth, slowly coaxing the quiet sovereign out of his controlled world and into the heart of the family she was building. It was a partnership forged in the ashes of a crisis, and it was becoming stronger than steel. Catherine, ensconced in her glass tower, was operating on a different set of assumptions. Her world was built on social currency, on appearances, on the belief that she held certain inalienable rights. She was beautiful, well-connected, and, she believed, essential to Jin's public image. She had not updated her file on him. She was working from a version of her ex-husband that had never been accurate. She saw a quiet businessman, perhaps a bit ruthless, but ultimately a man constrained by the rules of their elite world. She had no concept of the depths of his power, nor the cold, patient precision with which he could wield it. For the first 3 days, she did nothing. Her arrogance was a fortress. She told a friend over lunch, "Give him a week. He can't handle the children on his own. He'll be begging me to take them back. And the nanny." She imagined Ilara, fired and destitute, would come crawling back, pleading for her job. She saw it as a necessary lesson in loyalty for them all. When a week passed with only silence from Jin's end, her arrogance began to curdle into confusion, then panic. The monthly 7-figure transfer from Jin's family office did not arrive in her account. Her calls to his personal number went straight to a disconnected message. Her emails bounced back, blocked. She was being walled off methodically and silently. Her panic drove her to action. She did what people of her class do when they feel their power slipping. She called her lawyers. She instructed them to file an emergency motion for sole custody, claiming Jin was an unstable and absentee father who had abducted their children. Her lawyer, a man accustomed to messy but conventional divorces among the wealthy, drafted the paperwork with relish, imagining a lucrative, high-profile battle. Catherine, however, didn't stop there. She escalated. She leaked a carefully crafted story to a notorious society gossip columnist. The narrative was perfect. The beautiful, heartbroken socialite, her children snatched away by a cold, controlling ex-husband, their beloved nanny mysteriously vanished. The story hinted at dark, foreign business dealings, painting Jin as a dangerous, shadowy figure. It was designed to damage his reputation, to force him back to the negotiating table by applying public pressure. It was a fatal miscalculation. She thought she was fighting him in a court of public opinion. She did not realize he owned the court, the judges, and the ground the courthouse was built on. The gossip column was published online in the morning. By noon, the website that hosted it was offline, suffering a sudden, catastrophic, and permanent server failure. The columnist received a visit from 2 quiet men from the IRS regarding irregularities in his tax filings going back a decade. By evening, the story had vanished from the internet as if it had never existed. Catherine's final, desperate move was to crash the Obsidian Gala. It was the premier charity event of the year, a gathering of the city's old money and new power. It was a place where reputations were made and destroyed over cocktails and canapes. Catherine knew Jin would be there. His family foundation was one of the primary sponsors. She would confront him publicly. She would create a scene so immense, so embarrassing, that he would have no choice but to capitulate. Armed with her lawyer's freshly filed custody papers and a righteous fury, she believed she was walking into a battle she could win. She was, in fact, walking into a perfectly laid trap. Jin had known she would do this. He had anticipated it with the cold, clear foresight of a grandmaster playing chess against a novice. The Obsidian Gala was not just a party. It was his territory. The attendees were not a neutral audience. They were his allies, his business partners, the beneficiaries of his quiet influence. He had not just invited Catherine to a confrontation, he had summoned her to her own execution. The ballroom of the Obsidian Hotel was a universe of glittering crystal and hushed power. Murmurs of billion-dollar deals mixed with the clinking of champagne flutes. Men in bespoke tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than cars moved with the practiced ease of those who owned the world. It was into this environment that Jin Kim arrived, and the room, already quiet, seemed to hold its breath. He was not alone. On his arm was Alara Vance. She was transformed. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, a color that made her skin glow and her dark eyes shine. It was not a flashy dress, but it was architecturally precise, its clean lines speaking of a quiet, unassailable elegance. Her hair was swept up, revealing the graceful line of her neck, adorned only by a single perfect strand of diamonds. She was not dressed as a nanny or an employee or a subordinate. She was dressed as a queen. She moved beside him with a calm, innate grace that turned every head. She looked as if she belonged there more than anyone else in the room. Catherine saw them from across the room. She was holding a glass of champagne, her own gown a garish splash of red. The glass trembled in her hand. Her face, carefully composed into a mask of tragic motherhood, twisted into an ugly snarl of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage. The sight of Ilara, not just present but presented, honored at Jin's side, was an insult so profound it short-circuited her brain. All her carefully planned strategies, her tearful speeches, evaporated in a hot flash of fury. She began to walk towards them, a shark cutting through the water. The crowd parted for her, sensing the impending collision. "Jin!" Her voice was too loud, too sharp. It sliced through the elegant murmur of the gala. "What is the meaning of this? And what is she doing here?" She gestured a dismissive, trembling hand towards Alara. Jin did not react. He simply stood, a point of absolute stillness in the storm of her approach. Alara met Catherine's furious gaze with a calm, steady look. She was no longer the invisible woman in the blue dress. She was anchored to a power that Catherine could not comprehend. "You have no right!" Catherine hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper as she reached them. "You can't just steal my children. I have filed papers. You have an obligation to me, to our family." Jin looked down at her. He did not seem angry. He seemed bored. "You speak of obligation, Catherine," he said, his voice low and dangerously soft. Everyone nearby strained to hear. "Let's talk about obligation." He turned slightly, a small, almost imperceptible signal. Mr. Choi materialized at his elbow, holding a tablet. Jin took it. "The penthouse you live in," Jin began, his voice a calm, clear monologue that carried through the now total silence of the ballroom. "The one you believe is yours. It is owned by a holding company, Devereaux Properties, a courtesy I established for you." He tilted the tablet screen towards her. A legal document glowed on its surface. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, I dissolved that company. Its primary asset, the apartment, has been sold. The new owners will be taking possession tomorrow. You have 24 hours to vacate." Catherine's face went pale. "You can't—" "The credit cards you use," he continued, ignoring her. "The accounts that fund your lifestyle, your shopping, your lunches. They were all tied to a subsidiary trust under the Kim Foundation." He swiped the screen. Another document appeared. "That trust was also dissolved this morning. Your accounts are frozen. Your credit line is 0. A choked sound escaped Catherine's throat. This was not a negotiation. This was a demolition. "And the charity you chair," Jin said, delivering the final killing blow. "The one that gives you your social standing, your entire identity." He swiped the screen one last time. "Its board of directors, all of whom are my employees or business associates, voted unanimously this afternoon to merge with a new, larger philanthropic endeavor." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he gestured gracefully towards the woman standing serenely at his side. "This new trust will focus on educational programs for underprivileged children. It will be run by someone with a genuine passion for and understanding of childhood development. It will be chaired by Ms. Ilara Vance." The name, her name, spoken with such authority and respect, echoed in the vast, silent room. It was a coronation. Catherine's world did not just crack, it atomized. The performance, the arrogance, the entire carefully constructed identity of Catherine Devereaux, socialite and matriarch, collapsed in on itself. The mask shattered, revealing the panicked, hollow woman beneath. Her perfectly painted mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her clutch purse slipped from her nerveless fingers and hit the marble floor with a soft, final thud. She stared at Jin, her eyes wide with the horror of total comprehension. She had not been fighting for custody of her children. She had been a minor annoyance he had finally decided to sweep away. She dropped to her knees, the red of her dress pooling around her like blood. "Please," she whispered, the word a ragged, desperate plea. "Jin, please." He looked down at her, his face devoid of pity. It was not cruelty. It was the simple, impersonal finality of a chapter being closed. "Security," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Two of his men, dressed as guests, stepped forward. They lifted Catherine to her feet as gently and efficiently as if she were a piece of furniture. She began to sob then, not with grief, but with the high, thin wail of utter, absolute ruin. They escorted her out of the ballroom, her cries fading as she was removed from a world she no longer had any claim to. She had been uninstalled, permanently. A profound silence remained in her wake. Then, Jin turned to the powerful audience that had witnessed the entire execution. He rested his hand lightly on the small of Ilara's back. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice returning to its normal, calm tone. "Forgive the interruption. I would like to properly introduce my partner and the new chair of the Kim Family Educational Trust, Ms. Ilara Vance. She has been the most capable person in every room she has ever entered. I have merely provided her with a room worthy of her talents." He looked at Ilara, and for the first time, in front of everyone, he smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes. And in that moment, Ilara Vance, the former nanny, the underestimated survivor, stood bathed in the glittering light, not as a protected woman, but as a recognized power in her own right. The ride home from the gala was as silent as the ride from her old apartment had been weeks ago, but it was a different kind of silence. That first silence had been filled with uncertainty and shock. This one was filled with the quiet settling of dust after a storm. It was a silence of completion, of rightness. Ilara looked out the window at the city lights blurring past. The emerald silk of her gown felt like armor, but it was an armor she no longer needed. The battle was over. She hadn't even realized she was in a war until tonight, but Jin had been fighting it for her all along, quietly, in the shadows. He had not fought to possess her, but to liberate her. He had not made her powerful. He had simply cleared a space for her own power to be seen. When they arrived back at the brownstone, the house was quiet. Min Jun was asleep. A single lamp was left on in the foyer, casting a warm, welcoming glow. They walked up the grand staircase together, their steps in sync on the old wood. At the top of the landing, between her suite and his, they stopped. For a long moment, they simply stood there, in the soft light of the sleeping house. The night's drama seemed a world away. Here, there was only peace. "Thank you," she said softly. It felt like an inadequate word for what he had done. He had not just saved her job, he had given her a future. He had not just punished an enemy, he had vindicated her worth on a public stage. "There is nothing to thank me for, Ilara," he replied, his voice a low murmur. "I protect my assets. You are my most valuable one." There it was again, the language of his world, but tonight it did not sound cold or corporate. It sounded like the highest form of reverence he was capable of expressing. It sounded like devotion. He reached out, not to touch her face or her waist, but to gently take her hand. His fingers were warm and strong around hers. It was not a gesture of passion, but of partnership, an anchor, a promise. She thought back to a conversation they'd had in the library a week ago, talking about a difficult period in her past. "I don't leave because things become complicated," she had told him then, a quiet declaration of her own resilience. She looked at him now, at this quiet sovereign who had remade her world. "I don't leave because things become complicated," she said again, turning her past statement into a future promise. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips. "Neither do I," he said. He lifted her hand and brushed a feather-light kiss across her knuckles, a gesture of profound, old-world respect. Then he released her, gave a slight nod, and turned toward his own rooms. Ilara stood there for a moment, the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin. She went to her suite and quietly checked on the children. Maya was curled up with a book fallen on her chest, her breathing deep and even. Leo was clutching the small, worn stuffed lion she had bought him for his birthday. They were safe. They were home. She walked to her window and looked out at the garden, dark and peaceful under the moon. She finally felt the last of the tension, the last of the fear she had carried for 2 long years release from her shoulders. It was a slow, deep exhale that seemed to empty her of all the past pain. A real smile reached her eyes, one that was not for any audience, but just for herself. She felt a profound sense of being correctly placed in the universe. The weight was gone. This was not a fairy tale ending. There was no sudden, passionate embrace. It was something quieter, deeper, and more real. It was the beginning of a family, built not on romance, but on a foundation of mutual respect, of shared purpose, and the quiet, daily choice to protect and to stay. It was the promise of what comes next. Together,